What is up, everybody? Welcome to another weekend roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I jump in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. 3 finals to get to today on the show, starting with the FA Cup final. Manchester City take another step toward the treble, beating Manchester United. Ilkay Gundogan doing Ilkay Gundogan things, scoring the fastest goal in the history of the FA Cup final to put City up basically right from the opening kickoff. United equalized from the penalty spot. After the handball, Gundogan comes back and gets the second goal that ultimately makes the difference. Essentially what you expected to happen happened. City were the better team. They won the game. There isn't too much to dive into there. What I want to, and obviously plenty of time to talk about City with the Champions League final coming up. And this is the second step of 3. So I'm going to save most of my City thoughts for the Champions League final once that happens and kind of looking back on the season as a whole, however it ends. So I want to focus here on United for a couple minutes. This game was in many ways a nice representation of United's season and where United find themselves. First of all, immensely successful season. If you take it in the context of what this looked like when Erik ten Hag took over and where United are now, massive success. He won the first trophy he had an opportunity to get. He qualified for the Champions League and got to the final of the second trophy. Relative to where United expect to be, of course they're not there. But this was a huge step in the right direction. And it was also a reminder of how far United still have to go. Just look at, and again, there were some absences that played a part in this. I get that. But look who came off the bench when they were chasing this game. Val Veghorst, now Alejandro Garnacho. And I'm a big Garnacho guy. Really excited to see what he becomes. He can't be your most dynamic option off the bench against Manchester City. And would you feel that much better if it was Anthony or Anthony Martial? To me, what this season was Erik ten Hag getting the most out of this group of players. He pretty much maxed everything out. Now, could you say Jadon Sancho he could have gotten a little bit more from? Possibly. And that's an important thing to recognize and celebrate because that hadn't been happening. This team was underachieving. They're not doing that anymore. It's a credit to ten Hag. Now the question is, can you get him the help he needs so that when he gets the most out of his team and does his job, that means you're competing for Premier League titles, you're going toe-to-toe with Manchester City, or at least being part of that conversation and kind of in that tier rather than the tier below. And you're competing in the Champions League and all of those kind of things. That means figuring out the striker position and finding somebody to consistently score goals that's name is not Marcus Rashford. Whether that's Harry Kane, whether that's somebody else. It means figuring out kind of the depth at the center back position. It probably means an upgrade at right back. Probably means somebody else in midfield. There's an awful lot of work still to be done. And you saw that in this game. They just don't have an 11 that's good enough to match City from a starting lineup standpoint. And they don't have the difference makers off the bench. To change a game like this when you get yourself into the position where it's 90 minutes. They've had success against City before, right? You don't have to hang with them for an entire season. And even in this game, they just didn't have what they needed. And Gundogan's a great example of this, right? He's not Haaland. He's not De Bruyne. He's not Grealish. He's not Mahrez, Silva, Foden. Alvarez, and there are games, specifically the end of seasons, when he becomes the best player on the field and he more or less wins them by himself. It's part of, right, the legacy he's built at City. This is just the latest example. And I know United can't build the same kind of depth City have. But to me, this group has gotten as far as it can. Yes, you have pieces absolutely you want to carry forward. You've got some exciting young talent. But they got to get the transfer window right this summer if the story is going to be any different next season. And that has not been something they have done. So we're going to have to see if they spend the money to get to kind of quote unquote win the transfer window, and then if that actually translates into success. That's just what I was thinking about coming out of this game, is that it's a credit to Ten Hag and how far United have gotten, and it's a reminder of how far they still have to go. Second, congratulations to Barcelona, Women's Champions League winners once again. And this one was different. And this is really what I want to get to with this game. You think back to the previous time they won the Champions League. Didn't have too many issues. And kind of the big elephant in the room here is the French factor, I'll call it. PSG and Lyon. Right? Because this was setting up. Barcelona didn't have to beat Lyon to get the first Champions League. Then they got their opportunity last season to really cement themselves as the team to beat in Europe. And Lyon said not so fast. So they come back this season and once again don't have to face Lyon. Once again, get the job done. So at some point they still need to beat Lyon, at least for me, to really earn the undisputed team to beat in Europe title. What's interesting about this run is that if you go back and look at the last time Barcelona faced Wolfsburg and the last time Barcelona faced Chelsea over these last couple seasons, they were not particularly competitive. This time around, Chelsea gave them all they could handle in the semis, and Wolfsburg were 2-0 up in this final and forced Barcelona to score 2 goals at the coming right out of halftime and then another one to win this game. Right? Aggregate score against Chelsea and the final of the score of this final. 1 goal difference. There was only, I think it was a 4-minute stretch where they led on aggregate against Chelsea by more than 1 goal. That's the kind of stuff that only happens when they're playing the French teams, typically. They hadn't had a 1 goal aggregate score until that Chelsea semifinal in these seasons where they've been reaching the Champions League final. So that's the story here for me. It's a credit to Barcelona. They still found a way. They got it done. They have clearly proven themselves as the best team outside of France because nobody has been able to get to them. But it's going to be interesting moving forward to see how far Barcelona can take this and whether they can reach, 2 more finals in the next 3 seasons, or whether this is as these teams just continue to get better and better, specifically coming out of England. And now you've seen a resurgence from Wolfsburg here. If you start getting to a situation where not only do Barcelona have to worry about Lyon and PSG, but Barcelona start getting, and PSG and Lyon as well, start getting knocked off occasionally by some of these other teams. Because that's kind of been the conversation the last few seasons, is can Barcelona get the better of Lyon, and can somebody get the better of Barcelona? And so far the answer to those has been no. But it was much more difficult this time. Barcelona had to go earn it. To their credit, they did. So congratulations to Barcelona. Another Champions League title. Revenge for last season's disappointment. I am fascinated to see where this goes moving forward. I love this conversation and wanted to get even more attention because it is really, really interesting about just the dynamics at the top of the women's game in Europe right now. But as I sit here today, Barcelona, once again, champions of Europe. And then finally, I want to touch on the Concacaf Champions League final quickly. Lyon take down LAFC. It is not a repeat for MLS. Liga MX back on top of CONCACAF. I've brought this up on multiple occasions, and I'll bring it up again here. It is important to remember the fine margins by which LAFC put themselves in this position. Because all of a sudden, everybody's ready to crown them the best team this league has ever seen. Based largely on the fact that they won a supporter shield on a tiebreaker that would have seen Borussia Dortmund win the Bundesliga this season. And won a penalty shootout after scoring a goal down a man after conceding the latest goal in MLS history. Again, they found a way. The rules are what they are. I'm not trying to take anything away from what they did last season. My point simply is, they were not clearly the best team in MLS last season. And so it's kind of this idea of, well, they did that, now here they go in the Champions League. And what I said once they beat the Union in the semis to get to the final was, what they can do to cement their legacy is do what MLS teams have failed to, which is successfully navigate all of this at the same time and manage multiple competitions. Because they're doing just fine in MLS. They're going to be one of the favorites for MLS Cup again. They're going to be in the Supporter Shield conversation. That's where Seattle paid a massive price last season. LAFC have not paid that price. And they got their opportunity in the final against a Lyon team that has not won this competition. We're not talking about Club America. We're not talking about Tigres. And they went down to Mexico for the first leg and got thoroughly outplayed, just like they did in Philadelphia in the first leg. And that game should have been 2-3, 4-0 Lyon. And they kept it at 2, and Bouanga got the goal, and all of a sudden it looked like they were going to pull it off again. And then they came back home, and they created some chances. They had the better chances in the game, but they were bad in the final third. They weren't as dominant as you expected. Lyon got a goal, and all of a sudden, LAFC just lost both legs. The only 2 games in this competition they played against Liga MX teams. Right? They beat the Whitecaps and the Union to get here. I am somebody who does not want to overreact to these kind of things. My natural inclination is to sit here and say, it was just a bad 2-game stretch from LAFC. Don't need to make any sweeping declarations or come after them too hard. They didn't deserve to win. They just played poorly. It happens. But the framing where this was the coronation of the best team in MLS history makes that difficult to do. Which is why I was very much wanting to wait until the end of this MLS season to start talking about the legacy of this LAFC team. Because it shouldn't be defined by this one competition. the same way it shouldn't be defined in a positive way by the fortunate bounces that they benefited from while completing the double last season. I'm going to be consistent both ways on that. I'm not going to go too far overboard in my praise with how fine the margins were last MLS season, and I'm not going to go too far overboard and say that all of a sudden they really aren't that good and Liga MX is still miles ahead and the Sounders' win last season was an aberration because of 2 games. But when you put it in the context of the narrative that was being sold, the best team in MLS history just got beat twice by a Liga MX team that, again, had never won this competition before and didn't look particularly good doing it. It is a massive disappointment for MLS and a massive disappointment for LAFC. And so now the question becomes, what was the aberration? Was it the Sounders who got a favorable matchup in the final? Or was it LAFC here? And MLS is going to very quickly make it clear that this is a wide open, kind of evenly balanced competition between the 2 leagues. We're not going to know for at least another season until we see, do 2 MLS teams play each other in the final? Does MLS win again next season? Does an MLS team beat Tigres next season? That is going to shape the conversation moving forward in terms of how close MLS is to finally closing this gap. Because one Concacaf Champions League is not enough. And the opportunity here was to have 2 consecutive seasons where an MLS team entered the final as the favorite and then followed that up by actually getting the job done. And MLS went 1 for 2. Not horrendous, but Liga MX isn't going down without a fight. And not that 2 would have meant that it was, totally tipped in favor of MLS, and MLS is the class of North America. But it would have put a lot of pressure on Liga MX that the better teams in MLS have been able to navigate the Concacaf Champions League and get the better of Mexican opposition consistently over 2 seasons, right? 2 different teams, 2 different styles of play, all of that stuff. Instead, you have kind of the underdog Liga MX team taking down perhaps the best team MLS has ever seen. It puts what Seattle did in different context. It shapes the conversation differently heading into next Concacaf Champions League. So congratulations, Leon. Terrific story, terrific performance. Really bothered LAFC. They did a great job. Probably deserved to win by even more than 2 goals on aggregate. Really impressive. And you can't say they didn't earn this one because they took down the big boys. Liga MX and MLS. It's about where does MLS go from here in this competition and where does LAFC go? Because now the next piece of data you have is the Supporters Shield race and MLS Cup. Because it looks awfully different if LAFC end this stretch with that Supporters Shield and that MLS Cup that they came so close to not winning either of. Or if they win another Supporters Shield, get to another MLS Cup, and now all of a sudden, okay, they're reaching every final, and they came up short in a couple of them. We're going to have to see how this all plays out. This is why you can't overreact and start crowning people too early. And start making declarations exclusively based off of win and losses. The optics matter because they tell a story. And that story was that LAFC are not head and shoulders above everybody else. And you got another reminder of that with what Leon did in these 2 legs. That is all for the weekend roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.